Graham Roberts here. In this little video tutorial we're going to be examining how to create a table. This table will be a table of things. I'm going to start with showing you what it looks like when the script is run on an actual web server. This is the path here to the web server, which you may have seen in an earlier video when I talked about creating a database. This script is essentially quite simple and is shown also on that screen, although the formatting is not too good. Let's look at the actual script when it's seen in the local host. I'm going to start with the actual menu, and here we're going to create a thing, and well, we get the same kind of result, of course. Let's look at the actual code behind that. We're going to look at the actual script here rather than the heading. The script starts here, and first of all we use the require once method to add style. The style.php script actually just has a style tag in it, which I'll show you. You can see the detail here, and if I just zoom down you can see a bit more of it. Some of these CSS statements don't really apply in all of the scripts I use. I really just put this in just to tidy it up. So we've got some style. We only require it once. It's a good idea because it just means that if we do in a long script put it in twice, or not just for this but for anything we do, it is sorted out by the system itself. We don't have to worry. Anyway, it's just good practice. We connect to the MySQL server, and in this case I'm saying I want the database to be called DB2015. I create a connection using $db as my variable to a new instance of the MySQLi object constructed using localhost root and the database variable. So all in one go. The password is there as well. My apologies, I forgot to say that. There's actually 4 parameters there. This is a quick and a little bit dirty connection. I don't really I'm kind of just assuming things are okay to some extent here. I check the connection has been made here, and I exit if it isn't. It always will be on my local host. But I don't really, there's not a lot of error checking in these scripts because that's not the purpose of them. Well, what I do in this create script is I drop the table first of all, just to facilitate testing. This goes counterintuitive in some ways perhaps. You'd think, oh well, why are you dropping a table? It might not exist. Well, in that case I check and see if it does or doesn't exist. And so anyway, let's just say what we do. This is the SQL query string, and it just says drop table, thing table. Thing table is the name of the table, and if it doesn't exist it will produce an error, and if it does exist it will drop it. The drop is made from by the MySQLi query with 2 parameters, the database link or connection and the SQL if you like command, the query. The result variable will capture the result of this as to whether it's successful or not, and I won't go into that in any more detail at the moment, but it's good practice to actually assign it to result. So once we've actually dropped the table, we've facilitated testing because we can create it again. We can create the table. Perhaps this will be a new development idea arising from trying to use the table with scripts that we've made and finding that the design of what's called a schema isn't actually quite right, and we want to add or change something in the table, but not go into PHP MyAdmin, not go into the, if you like, the MySQL, but just using scripts recreate the table. So we just drop the table and then we recreate it here using the SQL of, hence it's assigned to the string, create table thing table, and we have a primary key that auto increments, of course, because it's primary key it can never be null, and it's of type integer, so it can increment, and I've called it thing ID, the identifier for thing. So that's the primary key sorted, and after that I've put a little comma, and after that I put just one more field, if we may call it that, called thing. This is of string type, varchar 30 characters, and it isn't null because otherwise there's not really much point in having a thing that is nothing in it. Notice there's no comma just before the bracket here because that's not allowed in the syntax. And after there's the quote starting the string, there's the quote finishing. This layout is just for humans. That's not what the computer really sees when it's being parsed or checked on receipt by the PHP processor. It just really sees a long line, one line, and this semicolon here indicates the end of the statement. There's the beginning and there's the end of the statement. The quotes signify the beginning and the end of a string. Well, we then do the MySQLi query using the database connection variable and also the query string. A result will happen, so it's kind of a custom really. You collect it. You don't have to collect it, but we collect it there. It's because we might want to examine it. Just because I don't in these tutorials doesn't mean to say that's good practice. It's good practice to examine the result of what you do. I'm just not doing it every time to keep things simple. Anyway, what we do here is we print that's table created if it is, and there's an error otherwise. It's usually no error, but it's just showing you what you can do here. So now I'm going to do some test data, make some test data, do what we call populating the table. It's usually a good idea to have not too much initially, because you can vary this. You can always come back into your script, change it and put more in if you want more, or have less. But what this is meant to do is give you immediately an idea of whether your table is correct and whether you can actually put the data you want into it, whether it's really, we might say, fit for purpose. This is a loop, and the loop starts from 1, goes to 7, so it goes 7 times, counting from 1 to 7. And I make a variable take on or assign the value of thing and the hash symbol, and then I concatenate. This is the concatenation operator in PHP. In many languages it's a plus sign used to concatenate strings, to put two strings together, but it's a dot in this script language. So we add the number 1 to thing hash, so the first one is thing hash 1, the next one is thing hash 2, and so on. This gives us some quick data to test our schema, or you might like our schemes, our plans, to see whether we've actually got a table that's going to be useful. The SQL query here is an insert one. I'm not going to teach about the actual SQL in these tutorials much. I think there are many excellent resources on the web to look to for that. I do say here, insert into thing table thing. Now thing was the variable to hold a thing, a string, and the values, well, there's only really one I'm putting in here, is $thing. Because it's a string, I've put the little single quotes around the apostrophe key on the keyboard. The reason for the apostrophe is because I started with the quotes outside. I don't want to end the quotes too suddenly by putting another quote in there and confusing the system. I could do it the other way around. I could have the single quotes on the outside and the double quotes on the inside. So long as you don't get them in the wrong order, as it were, everything will be fine. But this is there's another way of doing this, but that's the way I'm doing it there. As I said, I'm not going to discuss it in too much detail, but just so you understand what I've done here in this particular script. So we will be putting in 7 times things in the loop each time we make this query statement, and that affects the change in the table. This is of course an update in the sense of English. It's actually changing the table, it's updating the table. There is an update verb, we mustn't confuse the two, which we're not using here. We're just using the insert or adding a record, populating the table. Next, we show the table populated with some data to facilitate confidence, as I've written there. This is, of course, I should have said this earlier, this is a comment, and shown in green by this particular editor. The SQL string or statement is select everything from the thing table. Everything is denoted by the asterisk there, and so a record set will come back from the table with everything that's in it. Well, we know there are 7 rows in it, so we're going to ask a question, a selection here. First of all, we're going to do make the query happen. That's the select query, that one there, it's done here, and we're going to collect the result. I said earlier about the result being good practice to assign to result, and here we're actually going to use result because we can't look at the records without looking at the record set that's come back, and well, that's inside result. So we're going to invent a new variable called row count, and it's going to take the result of passing result to the method MySQLi num rows. So that's not my method, that's part of PHP. Now that should come back with 7 in it. But we are being very flexible here. I mean, I might want to change up here and put 17 up here. So I have 17 records. I don't want to have to go and put a literal in here and put 17. That's rather silly. So I let the system look after the counting for me in this statement here. This is again something you use many times. There are other ways to do these things, but that's a way to do it. I print out some HTML to say that I've got a table with a border of 1, and then within the loop, I create a loop going around for row count times, and at the end I will put up the HTML for ending the table. And good practice here, I will on line 64 use MySQLi free result to free up the result. Again, that's a PHP method. It's good practice to release resources, and that's what I'm doing. You won't be finding me doing that in the other tutorials, because although it is a good practice, I try and keep the tutorials simple. and so I will omit that step. Okay, so what I didn't show you was what happens inside the loop. We have a variable called row, not row, but row, and it just really is a, I could say tuple. It's just a row of the table, row of records, and that row variable is going to have a particular record in it from the record set that came back. There's 7 records and it will hold one of them, and to get that we used a PHP statement or method, rather, MySQL li fetch object. The object it's fetching is the result object, which was created as a result, no pun intended, of this query here. Once we've got the row variable, we can extract from it the fields, and one way to do that is to have this kind of expression of row hyphen greater than sign thing ID, and this is saying that in the row object show me the field thing ID or attribute. Now another way of doing this would be to write it so that there are angle brackets here, and within there punctuation marks and the field name, like that. So I'm afraid there are many ways to do many things, but I've chosen that particular way. I think it's clearer in some ways and avoids the pesky little apostrophes. Right, because you can always forget to end the apostrophe correctly. Just forget to type it in. Okay, so there we have that. And of course finally, well, we've got this menu being put up just so we can navigate around the web pages that we want to see. Finally we have the disconnection, which is good practice, and I hope that I've remembered to put those in to the tutorial scripts. Not a disaster if you don't in terms of development, but it's certainly not a good practice to forget to close the database, just as it's not good practice to forget to close the door when you leave a room, although quite often we do. Okay, so there we have that script, and you saw it running a little bit earlier.